Depletion and deuterium depleted water. I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will fully understand why depletion and deuterium depleted water is the ultimate biohack and why this is such an incredible breakthrough for next level geroprotection. Now, as I was led to believe in biology class, we are 75% water. Turns out that is a fallacy. In fact, we are 98.73% water by molecular weight. So in fact, we are water beings. We are swimming in our own ocean. And so this internal bioterrain plays a big part in health and performance and aging gracefully. And a little fact we should all know, 1 liter of water contains 20,000 drops. Water as we know it is H2O. Now out of those 20,000 drops, 6 of them are not H2O. They are in the configuration known as HOD or HDO, where one of those hydrogens in H2O is replaced by a heavier hydrogen known as deuterium. There's a very small amount of this water. In fact, 99.957% of all water molecules are in the H2O configuration, which leaves roughly 155.76 ppm to be in this configuration of HDO, 155.76 parts per million in the Earth's water as measured in the oceans. Drinking water, potable water, fresh water essentially, has less deuterium, and the average on the planet is 150 for fresh water, 155 for ocean water. So roughly 6 drops of every 20,000 are not H2O, they are HDO or HOD. So where does this all come from? From the Big Bang, from the very beginning of the universe. A proton and an electron were the first element created in the milliseconds of creation, the first milliseconds of creation. And as the differentiation started to more complex elements, the second element being helium, you needed a transition element or transition state of hydrogen. So hydrogen, being only 1 proton and 1 electron, added a neutron to become heavy hydrogen, and this became helium. Now, as the universe cooled, this transition state of hydrogen did not fully convert to helium and did not revert back to protium. It got stuck in the middle. So all the deuterium in the universe has been here from the very beginning, a constant, although on planet Earth, it has been increasing. So in the very beginning of time, the first 100 seconds is when this whole Leela or play went down. And unfortunately, this deuterium can only be removed by burning it in stars. So all life has a little bit of this deuterium. And to cut to the chase, in our bodies and mammals and plants, when we have less deuterium, we function better, live longer, because we conserve more energy. So there she is, hydrogen, number 1. The reason everything on this planet and essentially in the universe uses hydrogen for life is because hydrogen is so simple. It's 1 proton and 1 electron. And this will prove valuable later on in this presentation because we will talk about quantum tunneling. And it is the only element that quantum tunnels. So protium is the hydrogen of life, and deuterium is the hydrogen of anti-life. I don't want to say death, but it slows down the processes of life because it gets itself into the pathways that are reserved for protium. And when these pathways are exposed to deuterium, then all kinds of hell breaks loose, essentially. That's really at the fundamental level what's happening, to be frank, is this aberration of hydrogen, this heavy hydrogen with the neutron, gets in the way of biological function, replication, and contributes to aging. How much does it contribute to aging? Well, more will be revealed. This is a rather new field, and that's why it's so exciting. One of the other exciting discoveries of late is this neutron is not really a neutron. That essentially all neutrons are latent protiums. If you pop the neutron, it will become a proton-electron pair, or essentially a hydrogen atom. So neutron doesn't know what it wants to be. Unfortunately, in this scenario, it doubles the mass of hydrogen, which distorts the shape of a water molecule and everything else that uses hydrogen to maintain a very delicate geometry and blueprint for transcription, replication, and maintenance. So we think that because there's so little deuterium in water, and in fact, in the grand scheme of things, certainly you could say that. However, when we look at how much deuterium there is in the human body, by virtue of a human body mostly being water, you see that there's 4 to 5 times more deuterium in the blood plasma than the basic constituents that are needed for our survival, for life. When you look at how much deuterium there is in the human body, let's start with 1 to 3 grams as the average amount of deuterium in an average body. Now, when you consider how much deuterium there is in blood plasma, it's quite shocking because you see that there's 4 to 6 times more deuterium in the blood than the basic constituents of life. We need glucose, potassium, magnesium, calcium. So by weight, there is a lot more deuterium than this in our blood. And this is the clue that tells us that this may be an actual problem. By virtue of our bodies being mostly water, you see that this 1 to 3 grams of deuterium actually is a big deal when you consider how much of it there is in comparison to these essential molecules like glucose, magnesium, potassium, calcium. Moving on, where does this all come from? Well, I like to go to the root of things, to the source, to the beginningness of something, and everything starts with a contract. And early in Earth's history, 1.45 billion years ago, a eukaryote, a simple cell that used oxygen for its survival, made a deal with another primitive cell known as the mitochondrion. And the relationship they struck up has withstood the test of time, and one can say this is the most successful marriage in history of this planet. So the deal they made was that the eukaryote, with the nucleus of the cell, would provide the protection for the mitochondria and the food. And the mitochondria would produce metabolic water, and it's the water that the cell swims in, that the nucleus swims in, and the mitochondria swims in, and every piece of the cell is in this fluid, this ocean, that, by the way, our bodies make. So our bodies make this internal ocean because it's synthesized by the mitochondria. And there's thousands of them, even tens of thousands in some cells. So these little factories are producing metabolic water, and they're producing energy in the form of ATP. And this thermoregulates our bodies, allows us to maintain the body temperature that we need for survival, to be alive. So it's a beautiful balance, and it's a relationship that exists in a delicate state in such that if it's the wrong kind of food that is brought into the cell, is brought into the mitochondria and its inner confined spaces, then that can damage the cell, essentially damage it from within. So because of this relationship, we have the two types of DNA. We have mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA. And this is quite fascinating. You can see how different the two really are. And so this mitochondria has woven itself into the genome of all Earth species of oxygen using organisms. So most life on this planet is built on this primary relationship of these two completely foreign genetics merging into one or coexisting. So as we replicate, so does our nuclear DNA and mitochondrial DNA. And so we're going to focus on mitochondrial because a lot of the damage that deuterium does is here in the mitochondria. That's not to say it doesn't damage the nucleus of the cell as well. But we are looking at the factories where ATP is made. There she is, the mitochondrion. And inside there are complex processes, one of them known as the TCA cycle, or the St-Georgi cycle, or the Krebs cycle, whatever you want to call it. It's a very complex cycle that exchanges out hydrogens that are heavy, so deuterium, exchanges heavy hydrogens out for regular hydrogens, among other things, to try and limit in its breakdown of food, tries to limit the amount of deuterium that goes into the next step, where the bulk of the ATP is made, which is the electron transport chain. At the end of the electron transport chain are little, delicate nanomotors. In fact, the most brilliant nanomachine in nature is right within these mitochondria, and these motor generators spin at 9,000 RPM. Mind you, not only 9,000 RPM, but perfect 100% efficiency, something we can barely do with anything we make. So this nature-designed motor generator shuttles 60,000 protons per minute to make ATP energy and metabolic water. And unfortunately, this delicate motor only has room for protons. It uses these protons to cause the spin and the generation of ATP and water. But every about 5 seconds, a deuteron comes in, which is that guy right there. And that guy right there is twice the mass. So it causes the motor to jam and stutter. And no ATP is produced in that moment. Even worse, the vibration of getting something that's twice the weight, square peg to fit in a round hole, essentially, in the process of causing the motor to stutter, weakens the membrane in which it's held. And once that membrane is weakened, bad things happen. So there are millions of these little motors. They shuttle protons from one nano compartment to the other. And if that membrane is weakened, then not only is less ATP produced, but eventually no energy is produced at all, and that mitochondria shuts down. And so Sure enough, as we age, we have less mitochondria. When we're 10, we may have a cell with 50,000 mitochondria, and then when we are 70, very same cell that had 50,000 may have less than 1,000 mitochondria in there. The point here is that the chain reaction that happens to destroy our metabolic efficiency and go on to destroy our metabolism completely. And this is something that is happening nonstop. Essentially, if we're drinking normal water, 150 ppm every 5 or 6 seconds, our energy pathways are impinged by this bad guy, and we suffer for it in the long term. Certainly, this is something that we need to pay attention to over time. This work was brought to us, this discovery was brought to us by Dr. Olgun, another presenter of our summit. And in 2007, Dr. Olgun published what I consider a pivotal paper that showed exactly how deuterium mechanically damages the ATP synthase nanomotor. This is very important. The importance here is that it becomes very difficult to refute, very difficult to argue when the damage is mechanical. When you put gas in your diesel or diesel is in your gas, your motor will suffer and you'll notice it. And it won't be a theory as to why you put in the wrong fuel. So deuterium is the wrong fuel. Unfortunately, oxygen is stupid, so it binds not only to hydrogen 1, but it also binds with hydrogen 2 to create this problem in the first place. And this water gets interwoven into plants and animals and ultimately contributes to our demise. The ATP synthase nanomotor is quite elegant. It resembles very much the internal combustion motors that we make. And this is a slide from that pivotal discovery by Dr. Olgun, the displacement of protons by deuterons, and how this causes stutter and shaking of the ATP synthase nanomotor. And if you don't care to remember the science, all you need to know is that it grinds our gears. These elegant nanomachines that produce the energy in our biology have a notch for a hydrogen. And you can imagine a deuteron trying to fit on this spoke causes all types of havoc. For size comparison, you can see here the difference between a proton and a deuteron. How does that deuteron even make it through the motor? Well, at great pains. And enzymes have to be called immediately to repair the damage that is ongoing. So the protons in the intermembrane space flowing into the matrix space get corrupted because leakages in the membrane allow protons to enter the matrix space without using the motor. Eventually, this causes the motor to shut down. All havoc breaks loose. Inflammation ensues. Signals are sent to shut it all down. An early clue before Dr. Olgun's paper was 1990, when they found that deuterons cannot replace protons in active transport processes in yeast. So this was a big clue that the ATP synthase motor, which is a relic of evolution, one can say, going back billion plus years, this ATP synthase nanomotor never evolved a way to deal with the deuteron. The only way it deals with the deuteron is upstream, where other mechanisms attempt to block the deuteron from entering the ATP synthase nanomotor, which is quite odd because in the last billion plus years, the motor could have evolved to have an extra space to make an accommodation for deuterium. But for some reason, it did not. And this is the whole point behind this science. So I mention this over and over. It's a key piece. The destruction, slow destruction, the slow damage of the ATP synthase nanomotor causes a weakening of the membrane, eventually leading to proton leakage, which destroys that mitochondria and eventually destroys that cell. There are two ways a normal cell dies, either through being injured or through apoptosis, which is cell suicide. This apoptosis is brought on, I believe, from this cog in the system, this piece of sand in the gearbox that eventually destroys the cell, and this is known as apoptosis, cell suicide. If the cell gets too inflamed, then it sends a signal to shut itself down. So when you have proton leakage, it eventually leads to what is known as blebbing. That term is quite fitting, the way it sounds, because you just bleb right out. When the membrane breaks down, everything leaks, and that is really, really bad. It's irreversible, and it affects everything around it, and that creates a cascade, which leads to the symptoms of disease and the disease itself. So deuterium is the elephant in the china shop, proverbially speaking. It does not really understand what it is or how its presence creates a negative environment for harmony. We have to balance this elephant. We have to manage the fallout, the damage from deuterium. To review, hydrogen 1, hydrogen 2, and hydrogen 3, we don't talk about much, not enough to do enough damage. And it is the difference in the size, mass between hydrogen 1 and hydrogen 2, which makes hydrogen 2 so dangerous to our health and our longevity. Purely a mechanical issue of weight. But because this is so small, we're dealing with the smallest element in the universe. Because it's so small, there's a great impact that happens on the kinetics of the cell at the quantum level, and I will explain. The difference in the ratio between hydrogen and deuterium in the body essentially acts as a Trojan horse. This is a discovery of Dr. Gabor Shamlai, another presenter here on our summit. And what he discovered is quite brilliant because he found out early on in his career, and this in fact was the basis of his interest in molecular biology, and with over 30 years of case studies, he has determined that this is a theory, but that the hydrogen-deuterium ratio in the body is what turns oncogenes on and off. So essentially, This ratio determines your risk of cancer, or contributes to determining your risk of cancer. I believe this is why we're censored on Wikipedia, this particular discovery. So when we have less deuterium in ratio to hydrogen, we have less risk of cancer. This is Dr. Gabor Shamlai's theory and practice with over 3,000 clinical case studies. So let's venture further and explain why deuterium is incompatible with the quantum mechanics of our biology. When we think of quantum tunneling, this may be the picture that comes to mind. But this is a difficult way to explain quantum tunneling. This is a better way to explain quantum tunneling. Quantum tunneling is one of the most profound things that happens in the universe. This is because if quantum tunneling did not occur at our cellular level, life wouldn't exist. So essentially, we break the laws of classical physics to exist, to live. And it's hydrogen that does that. Hydrogen quantum tunnels. Again, what that means is that normally in classical physics, to get from point A to point B, there is an energy obstacle to overcome, a hill. And so you climb the hill, and then you descend the hill, and then you get on the other side. Quantum tunneling is when that particle starts off on one side of the hill, then magically teleports to the other side. Hydrogen does this. It's still not fully understood, but the magic and the brilliant nature of this is that without it, no life would be possible. So hydrogen is the only element that quantum tunnels, and it needs to conserve energy. So this cheat was created probably early on in the history of the universe because this cheat is essential. And what quantum tunneling is showing us that teleportation is possible, because that particle appears for a brief moment in two places at once. So it goes through this mountain, at least hydrogen does, and deuterium, being a type of hydrogen, still technically hydrogen, also quantum tunnels, but not as fast, remarkably slower. And this is what creates the problem. It's too big and it can't catch up, can't keep up with protium hydrogen. So not only is it twice the size and doesn't fit those places that protium fits, even though it doesn't know that, it is also much slower than protium, which creates all kind of havoc in replication of DNA, proteins, enzyme folding, things like this. And this is nowhere better seen than in the kinetic isotope effect of carbon hydrogen and carbon deuterium bonding. A carbon deuterium bond disassociates 9 times slower than a carbon hydrogen bond. Sit with that for a moment, because this is very consequential. This means that problems will occur in replication, inevitable, because of this kinetic isotope effect and the mistaking of one hydrogen for another. So the bond of deuterium to carbon is stronger. because of that extra neutron than the protium version of hydrogen. And this also manifests in the bonding of hydrogen 1 and deuterium hydrogen 2 in water. So you can see that the oxygen deuterium bond versus the oxygen hydrogen bond is different. It's a shorter bond, it's a stronger bond. So what we have here is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It looks like water, it tastes like water, but it's not water. It's semi-heavy water. I like to make the analogy of gum stuck to your shoe. We like the higher vibrational energy state, no doubt, and the lower vibrational energy state is what occurs when a deuterium takes the place of a hydrogen. Imagine you're an elite runner, you've trained for months, years, you've gotten a brand new pair of shoes, you couldn't be more ready for the race. And right out the gate, you step into a big, fresh wad of gum, sticky and gross. So this slows you down. It's not your fault, it just happened, and this is going to create a problem for you in performing at your optimal peak during this race. And this is deuterium. Mitochondria makes metabolic water. It swims in it. And this water is deuterium depleted, 60 to 70% lower than the 150 parts per million of normal drinking water. This is a great sign that the water our bodies want is deuterium depleted. The water that you lose, you replace with water that is closely matched with the metabolic water that your body makes, and the theory goes that there will be less wear and tear on your body and you will age slower. So the mitochondria in their collective evolution in the cell eventually became what we are today, a multicellular organism with a central organized nervous system. And in this nervous system, perhaps the highest expression of this original relationship of the mitochondria and the eukaryotic cell, the highest achievement of this relationship is the eye, our ability to see and process that information. As they say, the eyes are the windows to the soul, and also in the eyes are the most amount of mitochondria. The retina of the eye is where the most mitochondria are packed densely, like sardines. So reaction time becomes a great test for how good your mitochondria is functioning. You don't need a blood test. You don't need to see a doctor. You can simply evaluate yourself by taking a simple reaction test. So it's very simple to do. You can do it at home on a computer or your phone. Just look for an app or a website to test your reaction time. A signal appears on screen, usually a green light, and you press your mouse or your trackpad, and that tells you your reaction time based on how quickly you process the visual information into a tactile response. Utilizing both parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system together. It's a coordinated effort. And so this coordinated effort tells you what your reaction time is. And your reaction time is a great evaluator of mitochondrial energy and efficiency. Shows you how alert you are. So my personal reaction time is pretty good. It's 300 milliseconds, and I've gotten all the way down to 190 milliseconds, which is, I'm quite pleased with this number, especially being over the age of 50, my reaction time, I postulate, because of being deuterium depleted for the last few years, my reaction time is so good. It's at the level of someone younger. Now, trivial factoid, the reaction time of a house cat is 50 milliseconds. Humans are considerably slower than our four-legged companions. So as we age, simple hypothesis represented by this graph, as we accumulate DNA errors, as DNA errors accumulate, risk of cancer accumulates. So as people age, they have a greater risk of cancer. We know, because of studies conducted in Romania and other places, that show that when you reduce the deuterium interference, it actually helps in DNA replication and helps DNA repair. This will be very useful in space travel because DNA will be bombarded by all kinds of radiation. So if one is deuterium depleted, the DNA will have a better shot at repair. DNA exists in a certain double helix spiral geometry, and this geometry is very important for its integrity, for its ability to replicate, unfold, fold, and transcript to RNA and new DNA, essentially continuing the cycle of life, a copy of a copy of a copy. Now, there are 3 billion base pairs of DNA in the human genome. So this means that 10 million deuterium atoms exist in the genome, or 1 deuterium atom per 300 base pairs. Doesn't seem like very much, but as we age, what if this increases from 1 deuterium atom per 300 base pairs to 2 to 5 to 10? Is it possible? So this is the theory and the hypothesis of why we have mutation in DNA. So it's pretty easy to understand that if you have something twice the mass taking up the position that is reserved for something that has half the mass, that will distort the shape. And that's going to be a problem if there's too much of it, because that distortion of that delicate geometry will ultimately lead to errors in transcription and mutation, which is not good. We don't like it. That same type of spiral fractal structure is also seen in collagen. Collagen is quite beautiful when you look at it under a microscope. You see why it really is, why it makes our skin smooth. When you study collagen, you see the beauty of it because it has this chiral configuration, as do other enzymes and molecules. And what this means is that when it's woven together, the left and right, they're symmetrical, mirror images, left and right of one another. And this is what creates this integrity. And it's best seen in collagen because collagen is what determines the suppleness of our skin. So when collagen has integrity when we're young and this chirality, this perfect symmetry is there, then our skin is silky smooth. As we age, when we break down this natural symmetrical relationship. So the analogy I like to use is trying to fly a plane where one wing is heavier than the other. Upon inspection of the plane, everything looks legit. The wings look the same. You get off into the air, and now you are in severe risk of crashing because one wing, you quickly find out, weighs more than the other. So this can bring you into a death spiral, and this is essentially what it's doing. It's taking the spiral of life, and it's putting you into a spiral pointed downward. And that's what entropy is. Eventually, there's a total decay of spin, and everything comes to rest. So collagen in its perfect symmetry shows us that when it's healthy, it looks beautiful. So collagen, because of this symmetrical relationship and this fractal nature of its arrangement of a coil within a coil within a coil, a spiral within a spiral, is what makes collagen beautiful. And the way to mess with this beauty is to disturb this perfect relationship of symmetry. So if you have a hydrogen on one side and a hydrogen on the other in the molecule, as you see here, everything is perfect. And if that hydrogen is replaced by deuterium, then things are not so perfect anymore. Try flying a plane where one wing is heavier than the other. The fact that it looks the same is meaningless. It's the mass that matters. So this creates a kinetic problem, as we saw earlier. This kinetic problem creates a slowdown in replication, which leads to errors, which leads to the physical signs of aging. Collagen is skin. Skin is made of collagen and elastin and water and other molecules, but primarily younger skin has more cross-linkage in its collagen, and as this collagen degrades because of this deuterium problem, younger skin has more cross-linking in the collagen fibers, and older skin, aging skin, has less cross-linked collagen fibers, and this is caused, I hypothesize, by deuterium. The good news is that, as this study shows, the application of deuterium-depleted water internally and externally increased the collagen layer on skin. So it truly does work. If you're deuterium depleted, if you drink deuterium depleted water, if you use deuterium depleted water as a mist on your face, then your collagen will have more cross-linking and it will grow. And so we can see here another benefit of being deuterium depleted is healthier looking skin. So we know essentially that protium is what fuels mitochondria. Protium is what fuels life. Deuterium is what slows down life and inhibits protium from doing its job. So we have a problem of deuterium at the DNA level, at the metabolic energy level, at the enzymatic level, at the protein folding level. So deuterium is a problem all throughout our biology. 6 decades of research inform us why it is we start out as a hydrogen-fueled dragster, to make the analogy, and end up barely crossing the finish line, the carcass of what we once were being hauled by a beast of burden. And we come to understand that deuterium is implicated in this process that we know as aging and the winding down of your energy. So we need to conserve. We must conserve this energy, and we conserve this energy by protecting the ATP synthase nanomotors. We do everything we can to affect the amount of deuterium that enters the electron transport chain. And theoretically, if we limit all the deuterium into the electron transport chain, we gain the benefit of 6 times proton motive force. Now, this is theoretical, and I hypothesize we can achieve 2x proton motive force, which is simply huge. So when we give the electron transport chain pure water, when we give our bodies pure water translates to pure energy. And so as we age, we want to keep the integrity in our cellular structures, and collagen above all, for vanity's sake, certainly. So, to add insult to injury, as we age faster. The chances of a 90-year-old making it to 100 is roughly 1 in 70. And the average of a 100-year-old making it to 110 is 1 in 700. So as we age faster. And this, I believe, has a lot to do with deuterium. These are two examples, and I have more, of supercentenarians that have reached the age of 110 and beyond. And something these supercentenarians all have in common that I've noticed, probably analyzing a few dozen of these, is they have fairly good-looking skin. So keep in mind what I said about collagen and collagen integrity, macro being the micro, and having good collagen means that you have good DNA replication. It means you're aging slower, there's less mutation. So looking at old people, they may not all have the same diet, same lifestyle, but all the ones that make it to a level of supercentenarian, they have remarkably good skin for their age and lifestyle. I mean, you can look at an 80-year-old that has very bad skin compared to somebody that's 30 years older, in this case 110, and look at how good their skin looks. So it's not just vanity. There's something to it in terms of collagen and protein folding. This is fairly new. Everything we know about deuterium is fairly new because we only discovered deuterium in 1931. Dr. Urey won a Nobel Prize for discovering that hydrogen not only had one isotope, but also had deuterium and tritium. So that's a big deal. It ushered in the atomic age. It created the possibility for nuclear reactors, and it created the possibility for nuclear bombs. So I like to say that whereas the 20th century, we discovered deuterium could unleash an enormous amount of energy. In the 21st century, we're discovering that limiting that deuterium or reducing the deuterium in the body unleashes an enormous amount of metabolic energy, of bioelectrical energy, life force, and functional ATP energy. So the point of this slide is to show you that 60 plus years, people were onto this from the very beginning. They realized that deuterium is a problem all the way into the 40s and 50s when they started playing around with it, realized that it's not water, it looks like water, but deuterium is biologically incompatible. So the whole point of this is that in the 60 plus years that scientists have known that deuterium is incompatible with our biology, not much essentially was done about it. But now we have companies that produce deuterium depleted water, so you can reduce the deuterium burden in your own body. And this is what's so exciting. Not only is this science in theory, but it can be applied in practice as well. And I assure you, if you are deuterium depleted, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So we know we got a problem. And this is the elephant in the room. 6 drops in every liter, and the damage that those 6 drops out of 20,000 does. Animals die when they're given 35% heavy water, deuterium enriched water, over a period of days. So metabolically, this is your clue that what you have here is not water. And now you know why. The bad neutron. We go all the way back to J.F. Thomson in the 50s, who told us this was incompatible with human biology. We go back to the Russian literature that showed us perhaps real or not, but documented people living to an advanced age, 165, 195, could this have been possible? This correlates to those areas where the water is naturally lower in deuterium, roughly by 16 to 20% less. And so this is how deuterium depletion as an intervention for health was discovered. Whereas the Americans discovered that if you drink heavy water, you'll die, the Russians were trying to understand why two Siberian populations had such extreme longevity as compared to other people all around the world, or the Soviet Union or Europe. They had 324 centenarians per 1 million, and that's roughly about 6 times more than anywhere else. So a young biophysicist and a young gerontologist in Tomsk, Siberia, were trying to understand why. Could it be their diet? They pretty much live like Eskimos. So what was it? Well, a few years of research gave way to the knowledge that the water they were consuming, the glacial melt water, was 16% lower in deuterium. And so that started all off. And after a few more years of research with plants and animals trying to understand this thing, they discovered that when you reduce the amount of deuterium in your drinking water, and hopefully in the water that you feed your plants and animals, you will decrease the deuterium in your body. And in this particular case, it manifested as extreme longevity and an increased health span. And health span meaning your ability to be functional in life, and how long can you maintain that? Because I know plenty of people that spend the last 10 years in a nursing home. So how long can you be vital and contribute into what age? And with these people, we were seeing it well into their hundreds, and we were seeing these people giving birth into women giving birth into their 50s, and one documented case of a woman giving birth at 60 years old, natural. So this is because of the vitality that the body enjoys, the additional conservation of energy from reduction of deuterium. So these guys got it published in 61, their findings. And I recommend, if you want to read more in depth the history and the provenance of where this comes from, you read my article, A Brief History of Deuterium Depletion. And I explain a little bit more of how they discovered this. It's quite a fascinating story. And so they discovered that some places in the world have less deuterium than others. And if you live in these areas, you will enjoy a net conservation of energy greater than somebody living in an area where they have a normal amount of deuterium. The lowest deuterium on the planet happens to be in Antarctica, because it is water that is locked in time from millions of years ago, when there was less deuterium in our drinking water as a whole on this planet, and less deuterium in the oceans. These are the people. These are the Altaians and the Yakutians, and they live in an environment that is very cold, minus 50 to minus 70 degrees, 6 to 9 months out of the year. Life is tough, but they have naturally deuterium depleted water. If you want to read more studies, I've assembled everything I could find on deuterium depletion over the last 60 years and put it up at deuteriumdepletion.org. So you can go there, and for anyone that tells you there's not enough evidence as to the efficacy of deuterium depletion, you can see there is quite a lot of literature in support. But we are censored on Wikipedia. Every time a scientist or researcher, writer attempts to edit the deuterium depleted water Wikipedia page, the next day it is removed and restored back to this, which gives you very little information, doesn't tell you that 60 years of studies exist on this and 60 plus years of research. What it does tell you, though, is that Harriet Hall investigated health claims being attributed to drinking DDW, and she publishes articles on her website, Skeptical Inquirer. She reported that the overwhelming majority of DDW studies did not involve humans, and the few that did not verify any human efficacy. She is categorically wrong, and she also died this year. So Skeptical Inquirer will be no more, and maybe they will allow us to add some of the information which would be useful to anybody seeking knowledge on deuterium depleted water, or really anybody that thinks Wikipedia is a legitimate source of factual information. Now that we know, what do we do? Well, the first thing is to switch to a keto-adapted or ketogenic diet. A ketogenic diet is a deuterium-depleted diet, and more ATP energy is produced from fat than it is from glucose. So by all means, try to eat more keto, try to eat less. The chronic affliction of overeating increases deuterium in the body. The chronic affliction of snacking increases deuterium in the body. So eat less, eat more keto, and fast more. Practice grounding, meaning going outside 15-20 minutes a day, barefoot. Practice sun gazing, practice being in the sun. These all help mitochondrial health. These all assist your journey to deuterium depletion. So nature's strategy is to deplete the fats and load the carbs with deuterium, and this is why it's best to be keto. And what I mean by that is try to limit the amount of carbs, complex carbs and sugars in your daily meal plan. Try to limit it to less than 30 grams per day, or see if you can do 10, 15. Certainly you can experiment, and everything in moderation, including moderation, but predominantly to be deuterium depleted and to receive the health benefits of deuterium depletion, you want to practice a keto adapted lifestyle. The other thing we can do is drink deuterium depleted water, the closest water there is to the metabolic water that our bodies make. By replacing the fluids lost with DDW, you lower the total burden of deuterium in your body. Now here's the catch. Deuterium depleted water is scarce and expensive. To make deuterium depleted water, you need to replicate the hydrological cycle of the Earth. In fact, this is the reason why certain places on the planet have less deuterium than others. If the hydrological cycle is more localized and away from the hydrological cycle of the ocean, then that area will have less deuterium. You see this in the mountains. The eastern slope of the Rockies has less deuterium than the western slope because the weather pattern is more localized. So the hydrological cycle is affected less by the ocean's hydrological cycle. And a commercial prototype lent way to commercial production over a 10-year period. The scale up gives us the ability to produce a small amount of deuterium depleted water, and there are 4 or 5 companies on the planet that know how to do this, each arriving at the technology themselves, using very similar technology, but certainly nuanced. What the technology all shares in common is that it is energy intensive, and this is the reason why the water is expensive, along with the amount of infrastructure that's needed. Unfortunately, not anything you can do at home or in a tabletop or even a garage unit. These are columns that are 30 to 40 feet high, and they work continuously and are monitored continuously to remove deuterium from the water or reduce it. And our company, Lightwater Scientific, we reduce up to 97% of the deuterium in the water. That is me at our factory which continues to expand because as there's more demand, you need to install more and more columns. So quite exciting because this is very new and it's something that is working. It's actually moving the needle on health, as those that are deuterium depleted can attest to. Now, if this is going to make a huge impact on humanity, then someone needs to invent a new process that is much easier than what we use today. And certainly many are trying. So what we have here with deuterium depleted water, we believe is a modern, practical fountain of youth. The ability to remove deuterium from water allows us to have a new standard in water purity. It's just not a standard that a lot of people and a lot of water sources are going to catch up to or be able to produce. But it does exist, and that's the good news, and that is the reason why deuterium depletion as a science is so exciting, is that you can apply it on yourself and see the result. So to do this, you need to drink DDW. You can practice a keto diet, and yes, that will reduce your deuterium in the body somewhat, but if you want to get down into the 120 ppm range and lower, you need to drink deuterium depleted water. And so you do this over time. It's quite easy. You just consume enough water to replace the water that you're losing with deuterium depleted water. So you decrease the deuterium burden in your body by 0.5 ppm to 1 ppm per day on average. And so within 45 to 120 days, you will get down to that 120 ppm range. And then your goal becomes to maintain that as long as you can. Certainly, if you're not able to maintain it, the benefit still follows you for a long time. And that's what the research shows. And the new research will show that when you're continuously deuterium depleted, there is far greater benefit. But that is research that is still not published in a peer-reviewed journal, hopefully soon. So if we consume all this expensive deuterium depleted water in the hopes and the promise of reducing the deuterium burden in our bodies, we want to know it's working. So we've set up a laboratory to do that. It's deuteriumtest.com. And to do this, you send in a saliva sample, and in a week or two, we give you the results. You could also send in water or saliva. We can test for deuterium content. And typically, you test before you start on your journey, if you want, or you can guess what that is. But you test after 3 months into it to verify that you are lowering deuterium, and hopefully you are in that 120 ppm range. And then you would test every 6 months or every year just to make sure that you're in the ballpark. The bulk of the benefit being deuterium depleted happens in that first 20%, when you go from 150 to the 120 ppm range. And everything on top of that is gravy, certainly, but the bulk of the benefit is in that drop of 25 points or 25 parts per million from 150 to 120. My deuterium level, last time I tested myself, was 101 parts per million. I think I can tell the difference between being depleted at 120 something, at 100, and even lower, 80 ppm. 80 ppm I found was excessive. I think that is fantastic if you are a competitive athlete or prone to constant exercise, and 100 is just perfect. For me, I've noticed it gives me full optimal metabolic benefit, gives me great sleep, great recovery, and pretty good looking skin, I think. So deuterium depletion, it works for me, it may work for you, but certainly the science is there to arrive at the conclusion that this is a big deal. Now let's look at deuterium depletion and alpine environments. To climb Mount Everest, the average Westerner needs supplemental oxygen, or they will pass out and die from hypoxia. However, the local Sherpa needs nothing of the kind. The local population that assists Western climbers to summit Mount Everest not only climb to the summit without supplemental oxygen, but also carrying everybody else's gear. How is this possible? Well, it's explained through acclimation. But what is acclimation exactly? In this particular case, if we remember this slide here, we see that there is less deuterium in the water in the Himalayas than everywhere else. Now, in the Himalayas, the water, the base camp, is 120 something parts per million. I think it's like 124 or 125, which is significantly lower than the 150 parts per million that most people drink. So over time, a deuterium depleted body will allow you to use oxygen more optimally. And this ability to use oxygen optimally allows you to summit Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. Now, why is the water in the Himalayas lower in deuterium? This has to do with a meteor or a comet that had crashed there a long time ago, and that water had less deuterium in it, and this water ultimately became part of the local hydrological cycle, and so this anomaly exists up until today. This study here shows how this is all possible. Your ability to utilize oxygen increases when you're deuterium depleted. This is quite phenomenal, actually, because it will change the game in sports and high altitude climbing. Now you know why I call drinking light water geroprotection perfected. I hope you enjoyed this presentation on deuterium depletion. Cheers.